I consent to be recorded.
You have to say
consent
too.
to being recorded.
Brittany, can you say you consent to being recorded?
No, she can't.
I totally consent to being recorded.
Thank you, Brittany.
You're welcome.
Okay, so firstly, what are some background or demographic information on yourself as an individual?
Let me see. I'm broke. No. Oh my gosh. I'm sorry.
That's what I'm looking for.
Yeah. Okay. So, I'm an American, and my father is French Canadian descent, and my mother is from the country of Vietnam. My parents divorced when I was really young, and I was raised by my father, so I was raised fairly broke. Yeah, I was raised really broke. I lived in a one-room apartment with my dad and my brother, and then my dad remarried and finally had a house, and then I grew up in a house. But before that, I grew up in a one-room apartment with my father.
Cool. So, what is metal and what does it mean to you?
What is metal? Well, I guess I'll tackle the what it means to me. Metal means pretty much everything to me. Whenever I turned, when I was about 10 years old, is whenever I decided that metal was going to be everything that I wanted to do with. I wanted nothing else to do with anything. I didn't care if it was sports or anything or any other genre of music for that matter. I was just all about metal. It was 1984 because I remember precisely because Van Halen had an album called 1984, and my dad was repainting the house, and I had got a Van Halen tape 1984 for my birthday or something. I think my dad actually got it for me, and I was obsessed with the Van Halen 1984 album. And after, I think, 1984, I started to get into more metal because of just Eddie Van Halen and Alex Van Halen, just the way they played together. It was just, I wanted everything to do with that. Before that, I'd listened to my dad's records, which was like Led Zeppelin and Creedence Clearwater Revival and Peter Frampton and Jefferson Airplane and things like that, which was rock and roll. But whenever I heard Van Halen, I was like, oh wait, that's what I'm looking for. And my friend's older brother had a Motley Crue, Shout at the Devil, that just came out, and it had a pentagram on the cover. It was all black. It was a black on black cover, and it looked like satanic, and they looked all evil, and we were kind of scared of it, and put it on, and it was like everything I wanted it to be. And ever since then, Shout at the Devil was my favorite album. It's probably still to this day, it's one of my favorite records. Motley Crue, Shout at the Devil, pretty much changed my life. Van Halen got me there, but whenever I heard Shout at the Devil, I decided that I was like in league with Satan, that I was like evil, I was like gonna be metal. Like that's truly metal, because Van Halen was more along it was like a springboard, sort of say, to metal. Then once I got into Motley Crue, Shout at the Devil, that's whenever I decided that I was into metal. Though some metal purists will say that Shout at the Devil and Motley Crue isn't metal, but it's metal. Shout at the Devil is metal. It's the epitome of metal. I think that for the time and era where I came from, it means metal to me. People that were into metal before me will claim otherwise of Iron Maiden, Judas Priest, and Black Sabbath. But from the era that I came from, of the mid-'80s, Motley Crue, Shout at the Devil, was everything that metal epitomized at that point in time. I'm wearing a Motley Crue shirt right now, too, which has a whole other story to it, too. This is a good one. whenever I was a kid and I found Shout at the Devil, I got this T-shirt that I'm wearing here in 2015. But I got the shirt in, it was 1984, and I forgot how I acquired the shirt. Somehow I acquired the shirt, and my parents were against it, because at that point, whenever you're 1984, I was 10 years old. At that point in time, at that age, your parents supply your clothes. So getting a heavy metal T-shirt at 10, like, what's the story with this? Where's this coming from? What's the deal? And so I was in grade school, and I wanted to wear the shirt to school. And my father had remarried. He was my stepmother at the time. She said you could wear the shirt to school as long as you tuck it in. And yeah, you know, so I was like, well, I'm not tucking in my metal T-shirt, you know. She's like, well, you have to look nice. You can't look like a slob with your concert T-shirt. You have to look nice. And that metal T-shirt is just not looking nice, because before I used to have to dress nice. And whenever I got into metal, it was all of a sudden like, it was me in a T-shirt. Being a scumbag, it was like what I wanted. At 10 years old, it was like, it's kind of funny to think back that I wanted to be Nicky Sixx from Motley Crue, which is, now looking back, he was like a junkie. So at 10 years old, I wanted to be a junkie. Like, what do you want to be, a fireman, a policeman, or whatever? I wanted to be Nicky Sixx from Motley Crue ever since I was 10 years old. And, you know, reading his biography and all that, the guy was a junkie, which is kind of strange to think about, that I wanted to be essentially a junkie bass player. So anyway, back to my Motley Crue story. So I'm going to wear my Motley Crue shirt, because I'm all about Motley Crue. You know, I got the secret devil worship sign, so I'm like there. And so I wore my Motley Crue shirt, but I didn't tuck it in. And my stepmother, knowing that I was wearing my Motley Crue shirt, showed up at school after school, like whenever the bell rang, and she's parked out front. And I come walking out, because I live 2 blocks away from school, so I was just going to walk home. But no, she was there to pick me up and take me home 2 blocks away. And sees me without my metal shirt tucked in. And so I hop in the van like it's all cool, and my stepmother had a pair of scissors. And she proceeds to cut my Motley Crue shirt, and I remember it was right at the Shout at the Devil right there, and it became a half shirt like this, and forever ruined my shirt, and just ruined like everything that I was like at that point. You know, now I'm kind of like, oh, it still makes me mad to this day, being a 40-year-old grown man. And you know, I explained this to my wife, and she got me this shirt on eBay or something, which is, you know, it's worth a lot of money. It's really old. It's from that time frame. But anyhow, that was just something that, you know, no one could ever live down. And why and how, I have no idea. But I take it now as just, you know, I grew up with just like a mental abusive stepmother that kept me from metal, which in turn, that's one thing, if you're ever going to try and forbade someone from something, they're only, especially at a young age like that, they're only going to lead towards it more. And I think that's what made me lead towards metal more, is because of its forbiddenness. You know, it was like an evil, a sacred evil sort of thing that I wasn't supposed to touch, that I wanted everything to know about, because of its taboo, you know, intangibleness, that I was like, no, this is me, you know. And so I think around that age is whenever I decided that metal was me, you know, and I was metal, and it was something that I exuded and something that I would never let go of.
Can you describe what it was first like being a part of the scene? How did you first participate in the culture?
Well, that's a pretty loaded question, because initially I went to arena rock concerts, because that's what entailed with Motley Crue, and I from there, like Van Halen, Motley Crue, I got into Rat and Twisted Sister and Quiet Riot, and pretty much Rat, Twisted Sister, Quiet Riot, Motley Crue, Van Halen were the albums of 1984. If you look at 1984 and then those bands and their albums respectively, that's pretty much what I was into at that point, which puts me at 10 years old. It's kind of strange to think back that I was only 10, but I got to go see Rat, I got to see Motley Crue, I got to see Judas Priest, all in arenas. So there wasn't really a scene per se. The idea of a scene and all that came later on, as I became a teenager in the late 80s and the early 90s. The scene dealt more with being in a club and seeing the bands up close, which is actually what got me more into punk rock, which is along the same lines. I think that people would look at a punk rocker and a metalhead and can kind of distinguish the difference, but if they heard the music, they'd probably think it's the same thing. And I think that the club scene represented in the scene represented punk rock, and metal to me was more of an arena thing that was thousands of people, and lights and fireworks and a whole production. So as far as the scene goes, I would say that that had more to do with hardcore, which was like a melding of punk rock and metal and punk rock, really, than it was a metal scene per se, because metal in the 80s was just a really big to-do, so there wasn't really much in the local level. It was all like big concerts.
Okay, well, how would you describe the scene now, and how would you describe your role in it as now a quote-unquote seasoned metalhead?
Well, you know, I guess it goes back to what I was saying with the scene. It's really hard to explain, because I said that I got into punk rock and hardcore in the scene, in the local scene, and it really actually got me into it more than metal per se, the punk rock thing, because it was live in your face and it was this close. And with metal, it seemed like I was like down here and they were up there, and it was like something that it was like an entertainment sort of thing, and they were a spectacle. Where punk rock and hardcore, I was right there with them, and we were like one, and they weren't having this pretentious thing where it was a barricade and it was like we were like, yeah, you rock, you know. It was like we were all together doing it. And I think that that led me to more of like hardcore and thrash and things like that, where it was more of a crossover from metal, because like I said, metal to me represented a bigger, thousands of people on like big barricades and big shows, where the scene to me was not wasn't an arena scene. To me, the scene is like the bar scene, the club scene, the underground scene. Metal had already climaxed its point in the 80s, where punk rock and hardcore were the underground local scene, and metal was the big money game. So if you build yourself as a metal band, you were build yourself as a big money band. You weren't really building yourself as a low hardcore punk rock band. And so the scene essentially was a base, essentially core root of punk rock. And how I see myself today is it's been a long journey, because I got into punk rock and I got into hardcore and just playing hardcore guitar and stuff, and it's all essentially based from my roots in metal, essentially, because I started off listening to metal, and it's what got me into the music. And essentially, when I was I grew up in Texas, in Texas, that was a big influence was metal and arena concerts. Whenever I moved to New York is whenever I got introduced to hardcore and punk rock, and that was on the local level, that was in the clubs in the scene. And so I think that this New York influence is what really what got me into it, because there wasn't really a metal band scene per se, but there was many punk rock and hardcore bands that were doing this on a local level. They were playing shows all the time. I mean, Grant, that doesn't say that there wasn't any metal bands. There was a handful, in which I do remember whenever I first moved here, one of the first shows I ever saw was a punk rock band called Cranial Abuse, and they had just switched over to become Stigmata, which is a metal band and a metal band name, and they came out with their metal demo, which they changed their sound. The late 80s, metal had a huge change in tide where they went crossover, namely DRI, which was a punk rock band. They went crossover into metal, and they had an album called Crossover. A lot of punk rock bands crossed over. A lot of metal bands crossed over into punk rock, and so the late 80s was a time and era of crossover. And crossover is actually, some people say it's a genre, which is essentially thrash, which is has like a punk and metal feel to it. So where am I? Okay, so there was Stigmata, who turned into a metal band from a punk rock band, and now today they represent Troycore, which is a scene out of Troy, New York, which was this crossover scene that they represented, and a lot of the sound that you know today as this crossover sound of metal and punk rock into thrash, a lot of what is now the New York hardcore scene sound is essentially the Troycore sound, which was this metal crossover thing that they did. And Skinless, which is a band that I got to roadie for, I worked with the guy at the Pizza Shop DeAndre's in Saratoga Springs, and got to roadie for those guys for 3 tours, and they are a death metal band, but they have like a lot of hardcore grooves, so they come across as a hardcore death metal crossover band, and it really reflects the scene, reflecting way back to the early 80s of Stigmata, when they changed the name from Cranial Abuse from being a punk rock band to a metal band, that established the sound for upstate New York that made this crossover metal scene a punk rock scene. Because punk rock was essentially an urban sound from New York City, essentially from our perspective up here in the woods in upstate New York. And metal is definitely a suburban white boy redneck sort of sound that came from, say, the roots of Black Sabbath and things like that, like good old boy picking and grin stuff like Lynyrd Skynyrd and Marshall Tucker and things like that, where a lot of like ripping solos that go on for 3 minutes type things. And so once you have this mixing of this New York City sound with this upstate New York sound of being this like metal sound, that's you have this crossover sound. And I mean, you could look at it at any points whenever this happened with DRI doing crossover and all that. We were right here in this upstate scene with Cranial Abuse turning to Stigmata. Final Terror, which George Muscatello, who works in the Skidmore music department, was in that band, and you can talk to him about it, and he will definitely have more about what we were talking about. Because one of my first shows that I ever saw, being a 13-year-old when I first moved from Texas to New York, was Stigmata with Final Terror. And this is the first time I ever got in a mosh pit, and the first time I ever moshed and understood what it was like to be in the hardcore metal scene. I couldn't necessarily blame Stigmata or Final Terror and those bands for being metal as much as they were hardcore. So I grew up into the sound and into the scene. I started playing hardcore say 10 to 15 years later, myself in the scene, and did that for a number of years. So I actually say that again. I started playing hardcore and metal myself in a band in the scene about 15 years later, say in early 2000s. So that's how I see myself in the scene. I do a radio show where I cover the scene. I played in a band, in 2 different bands, hardcore bands, and a more of a punk rock band. So I've definitely contributed to our local scene and cover our scene still to this day. I've done a radio show for 18 years, so I've covered bands from all over the world and our local scene, and I promote local shows. So the local promoters that have been doing it for years, namely Ted Etel, who's been doing local shows since we were teenagers. I've been promoting his shows since we were kids, and he knows this. I do a show on WSBN at Skidmore College in Johnson Tower. It's called Full Metal Racket, and I also have a Saratoga Springs history blog called Briefings from a Spa City Metalhead. But anyhow, I've been doing the show at WSBN for 18 years, and there used to be a time before cell phones whenever you had a phone in your dorm, and you had an extension that was assigned to your dorm room. And 18 years ago, 10 years ago, before cell phones, we used to get regular calls every Friday night, because we do the show every Friday night. We used to get calls every Friday night from Skidmore College students from their dorm room phone. And we'd give a shout out to 3rd floor rounds, or we'd give a shout out to, 11th floor Johnson Tower, like things like that. And it just seems like now people are not in tune with radio anymore, or the fact that there is even a radio station on campus. And I've seen it with Sirius and XM and a lot of satellite radio. I understand there's a lot of different things you can listen to these days, but I've definitely seen the listenership dwindle since whenever I started 18 years ago with FM radio in general. Not necessarily metal, but I have noticed working at WSPN for 18 years that the overall give a fuck just isn't there anymore. I mean, let me just put it out there. You have a radio station, anyone out there that goes to Skidmore College, it's called WSBN. It's in the basement of Johnson Tower, and you should check it out sometime. It's on 91.1 and broadcast live 24 hours a day online. Just Google it, WSBN.
Do you think your age, race, or socioeconomic status has affected your role in the metal scene, and if so, how? Your role in the current scene. Sorry.
Maybe it affected it because I'm broke and I'm not able to do more things, but or go to more shows, or be able to get to the shows. As far as that, I think I'm right where I'm at. I guess it runs the gamut from all different demographics for being a metalhead, but essentially I've found that it is white people of lower class. After going on tour with Skinless, I saw, 30 cities, 30 days to get a quick gist of the United States in a month. Just a quick pull from each city. It was pretty much dirty white kids. And I can't say that I could level with each of them or see a parallel thing that I have with them besides metal. Because a lot of them just were, I don't know, unsavory characters as far as my standards go, and I mean my standards are pretty low. But I think that For the most part, though, it is essentially like lower class white kids that are predominantly metalheads, and you can check this out in the Skidmore student body. You'll be hard pressed to find a lower class white metalhead going to Skidmore. Namely because if you're lower class and poor, you have to be of some ethnic variety to get in to Skidmore for some reason, and they are predominantly into hip-hop and things like that. Metal is more of a white boy thing. And my $9 pizza is here. Hold on one second. Okay, so you'd be hard pressed to find a poor white kid metalhead going to Skidmore, because poor kids are typically of an ethnic variety at Skidmore, and the kids of ethnic variety typically don't listen to metal. And metal is typically it's like a white boy music. And so that's why I've found next to zero camaraderie at Skidmore for poor white boy metalheads at that school. The poor white boys metalheads at that school are the ones washing the dishes and cooking your food, and they fit that demographic, and they fit that piece of pie at Skidmore. And so I fit into that demographic, even though I am half Vietnamese, but for some reason there is this connection of this unidentifiably ethnic variety of thrasher metalheads that seems to exist. Namely, you can cue Death Angel, and a lot of bands like that were
that you grew up looking like,
that I wound up being like, oh, okay, I can identify with these guys. A lot of California thrash bands, late 80s and early 90s, there's a lot of dudes with Mexican descent and things.
That were James Hetfield, white hair, blonde hair, blue eyes.
Even Kirk Hammett, I think, is not exactly all white, but
I know her better than
anyhow,
you. What the fuck is wrong with you?
That's a woman thing.
So,
that's not true.
but,
I know it.
Right. So, anyhow, but metal is an international thing, It's actually a lot bigger in a lot of other countries than it is in the United States. So, I can't necessarily say that, I'm identifying with it on a white boy sort of thing, because it is huge in South America and, other places around the world. As far as my age is, I'm now just turned 40. Like I said, I started listening to metal in 1984. So, I think at my age, I've grown with metal as opposed to, say, people that have got into it recently that are younger than I am. A lot like, say, video games like Atari on till now with Xbox 360 and everything. It's like I've grown with video games, like I've grown with metal, like I've grown with hip-hop, like I've grown with a lot of pop culture in the United States, which essentially is culture to me, because it's founded in the U.S., and it is what we're about. It's what we live and breathe, and it's what we, it's our art. It's in our dialogue. It's in everything we do. So people say that the United States doesn't have culture, but I think that pop culture is essentially our culture, and music and the entertainment industry and everything has a lot to do with American culture. And metal is in there too, and the whole sect of metal and hardcore and punk rock is a part of American culture. And I am actually really proud to say that I am 40 years old and grew up with that culture of heavy metal, punk rock, and hardcore. that I've seen it since its inception and have a reference point on what it is. Because, like I said, like video games, like Atari, you know, I've seen it since its inception, and, you know, I've watched it grow to this point and can speak upon it because it's grown with me, essentially. So I am very grateful for being born when I was, because a lot of the cool things that exist to this day were born around the same time I was and came out of that era. So, you know, if you look at Hollywood right now, a lot of the movies are all rehash movies from the 80s and, you know, the time whenever I grew up. So I think that it's a beautiful thing that I was able to grow up and experience that and have that actual reference point to talk about it.
Does being a metalhead affect the relationships you make, whether it's family, friends, or significant others? In this case, wife.
I guess you know, I obviously would like to be with someone that I prefer has something to talk to about the same things that I have to talk to about, you know. I think I should do that again.
Yeah, like, are you saying we don't?
Okay.
Like, wait a second.
We're going back.
No, not at all, because we do.
I'm so confused, George.
You can answer that again. You can start whenever.
Well, yeah, I think that as far as having relationships with people, it's nice to have someone that is on the same page with you as far as, you know, things that you're into. So, you know, it's a huge part of my life, so it is nice to have someone that at least acknowledges that. I also I see people and see things in terms of music. I think that music influences fashion. It influences lifestyles. So I see that who you are really is representative of a genre of music. And who I am is representative of a genre of music. And I think that I could look at your iPod and look at the bands on your iPod and get a good gist of where you're coming from. And I think that's huge, is your music collection really is very telling of your demographics and what it is that you represent on this earth. More than, say, the collection of pieces of art that you have on your wall. Humans are more in tune in the United States, I think, from what I've gathered, are more in tune with music as an art form than they are any other art form. It's the soundtrack to movies. Without movies soundtracks, the movie wouldn't be a movie. So essentially, when it boils down to, because on your way to a movie, all involving is music. So I think that it really is the basis, the root of everything to me is, ever since I was a kid, has been based around music. And I see it too, not necessarily on a technical aspect, but also on a style aspect. Because I could be into all kinds of crazy jazz and technical metal and all this other math-oriented music, but I think there has to be a sort of an angle of style involved that, as long as it's too clear-cut, it has to have a sort of edge to it outside of just being pure math notes. For me personally, to make it listenable as far as I'm concerned, to make it music per se. I think that there is music that is very technical that like classical music, and I think that a lot of metal today is the metal of the classical of the future of now. I think the Paganini, Beethoven, Vivaldis of today are or can be found in heavy metal.
Okay. I can do this one too because it's not going to be long.
Did that make sense?
That was fine. Okay. Do you think metal as a scene and culture is dying? We have two more again.
Do I think the scene and culture is dying? No. I think that I've seen more. I don't think that heavy metal is dying. I think I've seen more variation of metal now than I've ever seen in my.
You want to try that again?
No, I don't think that the metal scene is dying at all. I think that the metal scene has expanded more than it ever has before. There are so many different subgenres of metal now that it's a bit too much to even take in anymore. I'm not necessarily a metal purist because, like I said, I'm into punk rock and hardcore, which are other genres of the heavy music that most people consider just all heavy metal or punk rock or just one big noise. But I don't think metal is dying at all. I think that metal, every day it seems like there's another subgenre of metal. So to say it's dying, I would say definitely not.
All right.
So yeah, subgenres of metal. There are a lot of subgenres of metal. They're ridiculous. There's like Viking metal, where dudes dress up like Vikings and they think they're Vikings playing metal, and they're like they're Vikings. They're like Thor. And there's black metal, where they're sort of along the same lines, from the same area of the world as the Vikings, and they wear face paint, sort of like Kiss, or sort of like a kabuki, and they have a distinctive singing voice. It sounds more like a dying witch. It's like a and it's very fast. The band just goes at blazing speeds. It's like, so there's the auto. So it's basically like with a and that's black metal. Then there's death metal that essentially has a death metal growl. And the death metal growl goes, or I like to use just saying the word re. So it's really key for a death metal vocalist to find words to use in their lyrics that end with re, like territory. And so when you hear that, that's pretty much death metal. And then there's let me see, what other genres? So anyhow, there's all these different. There's thrash metal. There's glam metal. Glam metal would be like what you would hear from MTV from the 80s and stuff, where it was like Poison and well, maybe Aerosmith. You might really be the closest you could associate to say glam metal, because that's probably the closest. Yeah, Motley Crue. And then there's thrash metal like Metallica and Anthrax and Slayer and things like that. There's many genres, but I think the main three would be metal, basic metal, like Judas Priest and Iron Maiden and Black Sabbath, which would be like the biggest metal bands. And it's all from Europe. It's all from England, and it's like it's a European rock and roll thing, essentially. And then America kind of made it into this glam metal thing. Anyhow, in the 90s, death metal became really big. It became a thing. Before that, in the 80s, death metal really wasn't a thing. Nowadays, when you go to a show in the United States, You'll have crust punks, which are another sect that are punk rockers that are like homeless kids that listen to metal, but it's a lot along the lines of black metal, where it's like that, yeah, and like, yeah, like really blast beat. So it's like blasting music with like a black metal screamer, and they wear a lot of patches like punk rockers, and they're normally really dirty, and they got a dog or whatever, and they got dreadlocks. And then there's metalheads that are in Iron Maiden, Judas Priest, and all that stuff. And then there's hardcore kids, and hardcore kids are like jocks, and they're like straight edge. They don't drink or smoke or anything, and they're all pissed off, and they want to beat people up and stuff. And they got like they wear like hip hop clothing sort of deal. And this is all generalizations, because there are definitely mixes of everybody, and everyone's their own deal. But for the most part, when people want to jump into a collective, these are the collectives. There's like these crust punk kids, there's metalhead kids, and then there's hardcore kids, and they all duke it out in the pit. Alright, so what'll happen is the hardcore kids, they come in, like I said, they look like jocks. They got like the hip hop clothes, they got the fresh gear, the flat brim, so brim would be flat like this, you know, and they got the whole thing, and also they all represent their deal in the mosh pit, and depending on what collective they're representing depends on their mosh style dance. So the crust kids do the basic punk style thing, which is like a circle pit where they run in a circle, and they just keep on clobbering people and just keep running over people and just running in a circle, and that's like a punk rock thing. And that's what the crusty kids do, the homeless dreadlock, you know, with their dog hanging out outside to the club. Those kids, that's what they do. The metalhead guys are typically old dudes like me that are like 40 plus, and they're typically burly too, and they do this shoulder check where they like give each other a check with the shoulder, like they do like this. So they'll be checking each other like the shoulder check, and then there'll be the crusty punks that do the circle thing, and then the hardcore kids. Now the hardcore kids do this east-west thing.
Two-step.
And so they'll go east and west, like say, parallel to the stage. Like say, here's the stage, they're doing east-west thing like this. And so they're doing this, and they're like, I'm pissed, I'm pissed, I'm pissed, I'm pissed, now I'm going to explode! And then it's all fists. Well, it's all fists and kicks and punches and all this thing. And they do windmills and things like that. And so then you'll have the football guy who's giving you the offensive lineman kind of nudge, and then you'll have the circle pit guy, and then you'll have the guy doing the fists, and that's what makes up a pit. So if you ever look at any mosh pits, you'll see those three elements, and they're all representing those three major scenes. And between those three major scenes, it breaks down between punk rockers, crusties, death metalers, metalheads, Viking metalheads, and then hardcore dudes, and then thrashers, and then so within those sects. But those pieces of pie all make up three major sects of the pie that I've come to notice, being an old guy, metalhead, mosher.
Okay, and finally,
Oh man, dude.
any final thoughts or any other things regarding metal that you'd like to just share that wasn't covered so far?
Let me see. No. It's basically I love metal, and I'll be a metalhead for life, and I follow the underground scene with metal, punk rock, and hardcore, and it's something that's a fuel for me every day that keeps me going, and I live and die for it. And until the day I die, I will always preach the word of metal, punk rock, and hardcore. And I got hardcore tattooed on my arm right there. It's New York hardcore. It represents
The only hardcore.
the genre, essentially, which is New York hardcore, which is specific to New York, and it's hardcore, which is a crossover between punk rock and metal. And it pretty much embodies everything that I'm about.